right, Greg. So here we are, and we're up to IP 01616, and we're up to Camper Van Beethoven's telephone-free Landslide Victory. This record right here, Bruce will be joining us in a little bit. I got a couple scribbles on mine. Looks like Crispy
When did
Gerson signed it, and then afterwards he said, "Wait a minute, I'm not on that one," but he signed
when
it
did,
anyways.
when
So,
did you get that, Jeffrey?
I got this when it came out. So my first exposure to Camper Van Beethoven was when the four of you guys did an in-store appearance in Encinitas, California at Lose Records. The four of you guys were against the wall. If you walk into the record store on the left-hand side, in between the jazz section and the new format of compact discs that were there. So to me, it was very appropriate because the compact discs were a new, relatively new format at the time, and what you guys brought was something completely new, something totally different, something like I'd never heard before. And after that in-store appearance, I was hooked. And over the past almost 4 decades, the four of you, as well as other members of the band, both individually and collectively, have had a huge impact on me. I did get another poster at another Lose record in store that you guys did a little while later, but anyways, so that's how I came to know about you guys. This record is totally fantastic. Greg and I have been talking about this for a while, but we had a few questions that we wanted to ask you guys. We're aware that prior to this album, you guys came together. There was a few other bands, both in Redlands and in Santa Cruz, Box of Laughs. I converted my cassette to a CDR.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
You
wow.
know,
Cool.
copy of Dogbook. And Sitting Duck and Estonian Gauchos. We're aware of all of those bands. And then somehow Camper Van Beethoven comes together. Can you guys talk a little bit about that? I was hoping maybe Molla,
Yeah.
would you be able to talk about moving from Redlands to Santa Cruz and this whole thing coming together?
Gosh, yeah. So, early days. So David and I were in high school together for a while. You know, he's a couple of years ahead of me, but and we just started. We started playing. Like he and I and a couple of other this guy Jerry Kelsig and a couple other people. We were just high school band mates, right? Just like thrashing around uh, and then David had the wherewithal to get a 4-track tape recorder, and so he had a master plan. He was just going to record a bunch of stuff as much as he could, and so as soon as that machine came into the mix, like a lot of our work sort of gravitated around that machine, and there's yeah, and so there was that for the recording side, and so a number of the songs that are on Telephone started out with those melodies that we were playing in that band. We called ourselves Sitting Duck for a while, and then after Sitting Duck, it was the Estonian Gauchos, and it went through a lot of permutations, and so and like a lot of those things, like people drifted in and out. But some of those melodies stuck, and and David brought some of those with him, and then David started going when he got out of high school. He was attending college there at the University of Redlands, but it was like this sort of this experimental independent college thing. It was called Johnston College, which later got reabsorbed pretty quickly back into the university. But he was doing that, and then I graduated. I went to Santa Cruz. I dropped in and out a couple of times and ended up back in Santa Cruz, and then David was there too, and so we just kind of picked it back up. Like he asked me to do like little recording things, and he had already been playing in a band that was going to ended up becoming Box of Laughs, and so it was there were and then I remember, yes, and then actually, Victor, you can help me clarify some of this, like where this fits in the timeline. But you got involved, and
Well, I saw Sitting Duck play at the Ritz.
Yes, right. That's the other piece. So there was this club in Riverside called the Ritz. It was a disco, really, but I think the owners saw that there was an audience for punk stuff, and so they like set aside like a weekend a month or something, and we started playing there as often as we could. And that was this whole cadre of um, this whole constellation of punk bands. I mean, we didn't really necessarily qualify as punk, but maybe in attitude, but we sounded kind of different from all those guys because a lot of them were pretty thrashy. But as I recall, uh, uh, but so we were playing there, right? And so that's where you found out about.
I think I had met David, and there was a place called Harupa House, which was kind of like this punk rock house that I stayed.
Yes, right. Okay.
We met at a party there, and then we got, and there were a bunch of those bands that were at that house, because I think like Renee's band, which was Death Patrol.
Death Patrol, yes.
And there was also, I think, like Moral Sex, or I can't remember Ronnie Knox.
Yeah,
Knox's band.
I have an old
Sens were on that show too, and the Dangers were on that show as well.
The Dangers, yeah, we ended up sharing bills with the Dangers more than once. Yeah, Johnny Hickman.
So that's that's about the first time I met Johnny. I mean, I don't know, because the thing was, there were these punk rock kind of houses.
Yeah,
because there was just no place to hang out, and
right.
People would just show up at these parties, and
right.
John was old enough to buy beer, so
yeah. And I actually have a story, and I think I'm remembering this right. So we ended up, you and I both ended up at David's house, at his parents' house, and this is where the Mao reminiscences about his days in Southern China. Mao came up, the tune came up. The three of us were just like sitting around his kitchen table or in that part of the house, and just noodling on stuff and trying to come up with things. And Victor goes, "Oh yeah, I got this bass line." And so he starts playing that bass line, and I thought for a minute, it's like, oh yeah, I can come up with a tune like that. And for that, and that's where I think that's where Mao came from.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Does that ring a bell?
I think it does. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of stuff. There was a lot of just kind of organic stuff that happened.
Yeah.
In the dining room off Margaret Lowry's kitchen.
Yeah, and I remember that being a very fun session.
Yeah,
and of course there's David and his sisters would like riff on stuff, and they were all hysterically funny. And I remember I would just be like splitting a gut, like I couldn't talk. I was laughing so hard. It was like, but some interesting, some nice things came out of that. Just like hanging out in David's house and messing with the 4-track.
Yeah.
So to pin that down a little bit. So it becomes, there's like a number of bands, I think is what Chris and Victor are getting at, but it becomes Camper Van Beethoven and the Border Patrol in 1983. And that's largely us rehearsing at my parents' house. I don't think we played any place except for a party or two. And then Chris returned to school in Santa Cruz, and me and Victor followed him. And when we get up there, we get Jonathan and Anthony Guest into the band. Right. And it kind of turns into more of a real kind of band then.
So Jonathan, you came in as a multi-instrumentalist, playing guitar, keyboard, violin. I understand that
sort of the extra guy,
Utility infielder.
Yeah.
My understanding was that there was a previous violinist with the band.
Yeah.
Is that correct? So did you come up, or did you play some of?
Well, the way I understand it is that they had another guy that was playing violin with them in Redlands.
Yeah.
So when they were up in Santa Cruz, Molla was like, "I know a guy that plays violin." So he's like, "Why don't you
blame me for?"
We had. I think that guy's name was Daniel Bloom. And
Daniel Bloom.
I only ever saw him that summer. in '83, and so there was a kind of a role for the violin. And then yeah, Chris knew you, Jonathan.
Yeah, because we were in music classes together there at UC Santa Cruz.
Well, and then also there's David McDaniel, who actually gives the band the name.
That's right. Yeah.
And he was just in the band for like 2 months, maybe, when we were in Redlands. But he provides a couple interesting fan favorite things, like Lassie Goes to the Moon. And,
Right.
And he's an interesting guy. He had a calling from God and left the band.
That's
and
right.
Became a minister. Yeah.
In Oklahoma, is that right? I think I remember.
Oh, he's been all over. He's in Alaska now. I'm still in touch with him a little bit.
He's in Alaska.
Yeah. Oh,
wow.
yeah.
He lived in Japan for a long time.
Yeah,
and
he's
then
fluent in
next stop,
Japanese.
Alaska. And that's
Yeah.
where he is now. Yeah, that's true.
Wow.
David, I read that he was a influence on you as far as his absurdism. I think that's a Wikipedia quote. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Yeah, so David had this character that was like a stand-up comedian, but none of the jokes made sense. They would be like they would have it was like a Catskills kind of Borscht Belt comedian, like with the one-liners, but they didn't connect right, but they were hysterically funny, right? So the only one I can remember is when we were growing up, our house was so small, when you changed the tire, everybody died.
Wow. That's hilarious.
It was pretty weird stuff, but it had this. I'm not doing it justice, but they were all like that. They didn't really like 2 snares and a kick drum, or 2 snares and a hi-hat, like, right? So
Yeah.
like that one cuts off too short. It was all about screwing with the structure. Anyway.
And so that kind of thought pattern had an influence on you, would you say?
Me? Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
just in that, like, just sort of like, it was very postmodern, right? Like sort of real seriously, like, oh, let's take the structure of something and then just take a piece out of it and see what happens.
Yeah.
So like a lot of times, so like take the Skinheads Bowling is like, every line is supposed to undermine the previous lines, so you can't ever really figure out what it's about.
And that was intentional. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
Because like, we're playing in the 80s, and like everything was so, like all the music was so loaded with meaning and importance, and was supposed to be, I don't know, so like we went in the opposite direction.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's more clear later. Life is Grand, perhaps, too, maybe. I failed to mention we're in 4 different time zones here, and geography is fascinating to me. David, I've read before in your 300 Songs blog a little bit about Santa Cruz and the Inland Empire having an influence on the band. David, can you talk about that? Like, especially with Telephone Free Landslide Victory, does you being in Inland Empire and later in Santa Cruz, does that influence these songs at all, or this album?
Well, I don't remember what exactly I was alluding to. I do know that it's just been a long time, but I do know that like both areas have a lot of people from elsewhere, right? I mean, Redlands was probably like a town of 20,000 people when my family moved there in the late 60s. And it became like a town of like 80,000 people, and everybody's from everywhere else. There's not really You know, like if you grew up in Georgia or something like that, you know, you might say, oh, well, this is the music that's from around here. I don't know what the music is that's from around Redlands, except, you know, the Inland Empire, except that there was some sort of surf rock psychedelic thing. So sort of we were sort of liberated. And then a similar thing in Santa Cruz, it also had sort of a surf music thing, but we didn't really have like a style of music that we could draw upon. Like, you know, that's not what the scene was. So we picked a bunch of little, you know, this and that, and just sort of ran it all into like just sort of a hodgepodge of things, right?
Yeah,
You know, punk was coming up, ska was coming up. We just kind of made a hodgepodge of stuff.
Yeah, and it was just a mishmash of everyone's enthusiasms, right, in the moment, like whatever you happen to be listening to. And the thing I've told people about Redlands is so there's a university there, which actually has it has a fantastic music department, but as far as music went, like performing, you know, live music, you know, there was nothing going on except for whatever was happening at the university, which, you know, they kind of had a lock on. And of course, that was classical stuff and some jazz. Like I went to hear like Louis Bellson and you know, Stan Kenton, like shortly before he died when I was younger. But there was no scene for younger people. And the thing I always would tell people is the culture that we had growing up was whatever culture we made. And so and it's still, you know, it very much felt that way. So when we were doing things like that, it was just like jamming at people's parties and things like that. But yeah, so it was in, you know, like David says, in a lot of ways it was kind of a blank slate, because none of us were steeped in a scene because there was no scene.
Wow.
Yeah, from just having met and worked with other older musicians from California now, kind of what I've discovered backhand about like the Inland Empire was, you know, there were a lot of, you know, like David says, there are a lot of people from the Midwest, from Oklahoma,
Yeah,
who came there. There was definitely like kind of an established country scene in kind of the 50s. It started to die out in the 70s. And there was also, because there were a lot of African Americans who came out to work at Kaiser, there was a pretty notorious R&B scene.
Wow.
But by the time we were playing, this stuff had all really died out. And there's, you know, I mean, I remember like University of Redlands, like the Blasters played there probably 1980
right.
or something.
Yeah.
And like the Barn occasionally did stuff, but there wasn't really, I mean, I remember like Bruce Springsteen at the Swing Auditorium, right? And, like not there wasn't a ton that happens here. And I do remember like a lot of the music that I saw in the area was at people's houses. So
Wow.
so it was really, really homegrown. You know, and I think that's also, I mean, just the reason I met like Chris and David was because the punk rock scene was so small. Like you'd go to LA and you'd see shows and you'd see the same people. And there was some weird intersection with the Germs and Riverside, because I bought my bass from Donnie Rose, who was Darby's boyfriend.
Right.
So there was a weird intersection, but it was a very small scene.
Yeah.
You know, because I started meeting people that I work with now. Like I met DJ Bonebreak probably when I was 16 the first time, right? So
Wow.
so it's just strange because, you know, there wasn't anything happening. We had to kind of make it ourselves.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Blasters, and of course now you're in a project with Alvin, with the Third Mind, which is a fantastic project. Looking forward to seeing you guys early next year. Hey, Greg, we were talking earlier about the influence of the Inland Empire, and you had a couple questions about that scene, maybe not musically, but something to do with motorcycles. And
No, I just brought up kind of the cultural undercurrents and history of the difference between, say, the Inland Empire, Redlands, and Santa Cruz, sort of hippies versus a hippie area and then a biker area, because I knew people that were involved with like the Vagos and Psychos and stuff out at Redlands. So that
Well,
was
it
just
is like that's the, you know, it's the home of the Hells Angels, San Bernardino.
yeah, well, yeah, Fontana. started out there.
Glorious Fontana. Oh.
Yeah, but yeah. So when I think of some of the areas of the Inland Empire, not to sort of stereotype, I have some of that. There's sort of that undercurrent, and like the old, when Zappa and the people that became the original incarnation of the Mothers were playing, the R&B circuit out in that area in San Bernardino and Riverside and all that kind of stuff. Ray Paul, Baby Ray and the Snakes, and Motorhead Sherwood and all those people. So it's a very different vibe than sort of what came later.
Yeah, that's
So,
definitely part of the history.
Yeah, so one of the things was I worked at a newspaper all through high school, and then when I was in college as well too. And the press room was all bikers, and I mean like Hell's Angels and one Mongol, and they got along. I didn't really know much about that scene, and they were just dudes I worked with, but they were all super into music, and they played a lot of just like deep blues and early R&B and stuff like that, really loud. So there was that element there, and I do remember that being quite, I was exposed to a lot of stuff that way.
Yeah. So I mean, given that there wasn't like some established scene in some direction, that you felt that sort of gave you that freedom more to just kind of do whatever you want, versus say like the Hollywood scene, where it seemed like always there was a lot of it was kind of rigid, especially once hardcore kind of came in. The early days of the punk scene in LA was more eclectic, and then you had the teenagers with the steel boots come in, and things started sounding the same.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's what we were. It was kind of a reaction to that. But and one of the points of playing, it wasn't really why we started playing ska, but we found it very handy that we had these kind of ska tinged numbers, because in front of certain crowds, they didn't necessarily like us, or certain factions of the crowd didn't like us. But if we played a ska number, the skinheads would go, "Oh, okay, these guys are cool."
To win them over.
Right?
Something they
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. One thing that I really love about that album on this like the ska instrumentals and things is that kind of Balkan klezmer Russian element. And where did that come from?
We
I
just
mean-
kind of made it up.
Yeah.
But Jonathan seemed to be a little more versed in all of this, or at least a little more familiar with it.
But the thing is, it's like when you say that, like, the areas like Inland Empire and Santa Cruz had sort of lost any sort of local scene or any style. The thing is, it's like by the time that we were teenagers in the late 70s, we'd been exposed to most everything by television,
Right.
and so it's like trying to do these things was not a process of trying to get it right. It was a process of trying to, make a simulacrum of it, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was like trying to get it wrong. And there was a fascination with television theme songs. I mean, I don't know how many television theme songs we riffed on at one point or another through
Sure. The
our
SWAT
careers.
scene.
That was a great one.
Yep. And I always kind of thought, I mean, and just float this to you guys, but it seemed like the Monkees weirdly was like this weird informative thing musically. And I think it's like Lady Griselda maybe, or something like that. But
Yeah. Your Auntie Griselda, yes.
or Auntie Griselda, because like, that show was in syndication in the afternoons.
Yeah.
Like when you think about like the media landscape then versus now, we just had so little to work with,
Right.
Yeah.
I had like my cousin's Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young records and the Beatles.
Yeah.
And there just wasn't much to go with. You just kind of made it up, and what you read or maybe what you saw when you would go see a show.
Yeah, here's a
Right.
good example. Here's a good example of like there were actually some precursors to what we were doing in the Inland Empire as well as Santa Cruz, but we weren't aware of them. And let me give you an example, because so my band, or me and Chris's band, Box of Laughs, had a certain following long before Camper really took off, and it was actually kind of the more popular band. And there was this guy Ray Farrell who was, I think it was Pell Mell's manager, and then he worked for SST. He loved Box of Laughs, and he started trying to help Box of Laughs out. And for some reason, I gave him the Camper record when we recorded it, and he said, "Oh, so you guys are really into Kaleidoscope?" And I said, "Who?" He goes, "Kaleidoscope. You're from Redlands and Santa Cruz, the Inland Empire and Santa Cruz. You must know Kaleidoscope." And this is, of course, David Lindley, Solomon Felthouse. Solomon Felthouse had moved to Santa Cruz, apparently. I was unaware of this. And I was like, "Who?" And he goes, "Oh, well, I have to fix this problem." And he made a cassette that day made us cassettes of the entire Kaleidoscope catalog. And we started listening. This is after we made the first record. We started listening to it, and we're like, holy crap, like, this is us, right? And it has both the Santa Cruz and the
Redlands.
Inland Empire. Well, it wasn't Redlands. It was, where were they from? Montclair or
Claremont, I think. Yeah, the Paris of the Inland Empire.
The Paris of the Inland Empire. Yes.
So Bruce, I had a question for you. You released Telephone Free Landslide Victory. How did this happen?
How did this happen?
Yeah. How did it end up on IPR?
Victor, after buying a copy of Savage Republic's Tragic Figures album, filled out the reply card and mailed it in. And I recall it being probably the best handwriting of any card that I received was Victor's card. And so he and I just started, I don't know, making, corresponding, because I would respond to people who sent in those cards at that point, because there wasn't that, there was a number of people, but it wasn't a huge amount. So there was a lot of mail going back and forth. And then, as I recall it, I first met Victor at the Desolation Center
I think that's right.
Mojave Exodus that Savage Republic and the Minutemen played, and he got a ticket from that, and he introduced himself. And as I recall, I think he said, "I have this band, can I send you a demo tape?" And then eventually a cassette tape showed up in the mail.
I think that's right. I was trying to think this morning of when I first saw Savage Republic. I can't remember, because there were a lot of little shows in weird places. Like, I remember some bar on the south side of downtown LA that was like a truck stop. There were some very interesting little weird things. But yeah, I got the record, and yeah, I sent that card in. And then I think what I sent you is, David, we recorded that demo, right? I think the summer that we were at your mom's house before we went to Santa Cruz. And I think that's the first thing I sent you. And then we were just a kind of an open dialogue, right?
Yeah. It was interesting because I really enjoyed it. And of course, I really enjoyed the instrumentals, the ska type instrumentals. And there were some great catchy songs on there. And a couple of songs that, as far as I know, haven't yet to be released, and I hope at some point there will be an opportunity to. But and I just started playing it for my friends. It's like I would have somebody come over for dinner. I'm like, "Oh, listen to this," and I was feeling like it was too left field for what I was doing with IPR, which was more of the post-punk sound. But I don't know, the more I listened to it, the more I just thought, this is great. You should do something with this. And then I think, Victor, you sent me some of the new recordings that you were doing. And
I was trying to remember also too, we recorded that was it 85 that we recorded it, or 84? You guys remember?
Early 85.
it was released in 85.
Spring of
So you
85.
probably recorded it in '84, I would think.
No, I think we recorded in January of '85, and it was
Yeah,
done
and then it came out in the spring, right?
That what?
Right.
I
So
think then it came out that
in the
fall
spring, Ben, right? It came out in '85, right?
Yeah, June of '85. We
June.
went up to Davis, where I grew up, and recorded in Dave Gill's and
Yes.
Dave Scott Millington's place.
Right.
Game theory, right?
Yeah,
Game
he played in Game Theory, and Millington is the brother of the Millington sisters from the band Fanny,
Oh wow.
Ah!
who grew up in Sacramento. So it's like they had this little garage studio.
Wild.
It was like 2 weekends, right? One weekend
Yeah.
to record it and one weekend to mix it.
Wow.
Yeah,
That was
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
So I don't know then, Bruce, if you were talking about putting out the record with you and did it, or if we just did it and sent it to you. I don't remember.
didn't take long.
I seem to think you just did it and sent it to me. I mean, I think we were talking about, doing something, and then you said, "Oh, we're recording the album," and I said, "Yeah, let's put it out." So things happened a lot faster back then than they do nowadays.
You really did. You could get something pressed inside of 6 months. That's impossible.
So
I love
had-
this. Like all this hinged on Victor filling out a card and a record he bought.
That's the mail used to work.
Everything had to
But
start
it's all,
somewhere.
but it's always works that way.
It's all because of
Every
your
artist I've ever talked to, there's just some weird accidental thing that they did that like is the thing that makes it happen for them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Agreed.
question. I wanted to ask you guys about the writing process, particularly in the early days. How did you guys come up with these songs? I know a lot of these are credited to the band. David, you're credited. How would you guys come up? Would people come up with ideas, or?
Well, I'm usually just credited on something that I already had that came into the band. But a lot of times those were written with Chris Molla too in a previous band. But I mean, I just felt like we got together. I mean, the reason that everybody's credited on it is we would get into, it's like the Nashville route. Everybody who's in the room gets writing credit, because it's impossible to even tell what people contributed sometime
Right.
when you're in the process, right? And what it is that people like about the song that made the song, and stuff like that. So I think that's one of the things, but it was super collaborative. I mean, very, very collaborative.
And I think I recall having a meeting about this and saying and agreeing that we're not gonna try to tease this out on this first record. We're just gonna distribute all the credits, and for that very reason.
Yeah, and just like you the way you talked about Mal, I mean, that's kind of how I remember a lot of like the instrumentals, for instance. Like there might have been a chord progression, but then I remember often like Jonathan and Chris coming up with melodies. It just, that's kind of how things worked out.
Oh, one other anecdote I want to just tell a little bit about. One of my favorite memories from the recording session was coming up with 9 of Discs.
Yeah.
Because you guys remember this, because David came up with the picking part that he plays, and we all just started farting around. And so I think I came up with the chords, and then Jonathan, you ran and got your violin bow and started like scraping on the tam, and it was all just like that. Literally came out of a jam in the studio while we were recording it, and I remember I still get a little tingly thinking about how that came up, because really.
That was definitely a good one. I remember that feeling like there was a lot of interesting kind of power in what we were doing.
Yeah.
I have a funny anecdote about recording also in that garage, and that is that the band wasn't used to the idea of trying to play, drums, bass, and a rhythm guitar and not sing the song right in the studio. So it's like, here it's like I'm sitting in the control room. Sometimes Chris Molla is sitting in the control room, and and it's like Victor and David Lowery and Anthony Guest are in there trying to play the song, right? But
And
it's
keep track of the form without the words.
Yeah, but without the words, they're like there's no ups and downs. And I remember if I have any claim to anything that is historical in the world of rock music, it's this. When you were playing Take the Skinheads Bowling, they had forgotten to do that da 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 in the choruses, and I was like, but wait, no, that's the chorus part. You guys have to do that. And like, oh, right, we weren't singing, so forgot to do that.
Awesome.
One other thing too is like I'm teaching bass to people right now. David taught me major and minor scales on the bass. That was because David played bass in Box Labs, and I learned a lot from his playing. So I recently used that song, Skinhead Stomp, actually was a song.
Yeah.
I used that song as a bass lesson for a student of mine. And it was funny because I was playing it for him in my studio, and he's listening to it, trying to elaborate on major and minor scales. And then Chris's guitar solo came up. It's a great guitar solo for 1985. Just stupendous playing, really nice.
And you never know if you can believe what you read, but I had read that the original title for the album was Telephone Tree, Landslide Victory. Is there any truth to that?
I think there is, yeah, and I think we had a typo and decided Telephone Free was way superior. I think that's what happened.
I think actually, I actually think it was Telephone Tree Landslide Victory, and whatever documents we gave to Bruce, I think couldn't read my writing, probably my writing, not Victor's writing.
Obviously.
Right. Right. Which is another interesting kaleidoscope parallel, because was their album called Bacon to Mars from Mars? Bacon from Mars, and the record company was like, it can't possibly be Bacon from Mars. It must be Beacon from Mars.
Right.
I think I read that as well.
So where did Telephone Tree Landslide Victory come? Was that one of those absurdist?
Wasn't that David McDaniel too?
Maybe.
No, that's Victor.
Yeah, I think that was
Victor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right. It was just free association.
Oh, right on. Yeah.
Because we were like, what do we call it?
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, just randomness.
Yeah,
In the spirit. Yes.
Yeah.
You decided against the Chinchilla Festival.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, that was it. I'm glad we did.
So I always have to ask the artists of the records that Bruce have put out. Were you happy with how it turned out on IPR? Were you guys happy with the visual? And
It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, how could you not be?
Yeah.
Plus, he printed so many different colors and so many different
Yeah.
kinds
It was lovely.
of things of it.
Yeah, you should see the comments of like the comments on Discogs on these things are like, I mean, that's a good, they're like, or people really confused about how there's different colors on different covers and thinking they're different editions. And it's really great that way. I mean, it's very collectible for that reason, you know, and it's just, it didn't look like, for most people across the country who weren't familiar with IPR, IPR was a little bit known in California, but in the rest of the country, they were looking at this and go, what is that? Well, this is crazy. This has a look like nothing else.
Yeah,
And then the promo copies that went out to radio stations a lot of times had some of the text reversed sides. So like the back text would be on the front and the front text would be on the back, things like that, or different. There was an orange and black variation for Halloween, you know, all different kinds of things.
The way that orange and black variation came about was because when the record just took off, we thought, okay, we need to send a lot more promos out, but these covers are expensive to make. So we just did a simple 2-color orange and black version for, I think there were maybe 200 or 300 of those that were radio promos or, promo copies.
And Bruce, I think with mine, I think you wanted to conserve, because in mine, even the inside, there was something going on. I don't know if you could see it, but it looked like there's some kind of print. And You
So
probably
that happens occasionally when you accidentally print on the cylinder of the press, and if you don't wipe it off, the ink off very well, then you get maybe 5 or 6 ones that have the offsetting on the backside. So we're at a point now where any weird, mistakes like that, we just leave them in because people like stuff like that. It's like,
Makes it more
a
or unique.
professional printer would go, oh no, we have to pull that one out. It's like, no. People like that.
Did you have a rationale to the inks you chose at the time? Was it just basically what you had in stock, or?
Probably, I don't know. I think it was just fun seeing the imagery in different colors. And it was interesting. I was interviewed once sometime in the 1980s by somebody who was asking me, what was my biggest influence in my design style? And I thought about it, and I thought postage stamps, because you'd have these like colorful stamps from like British colonies, an island in the Pacific, and they'd have this picture of some scene there, but it would get printed in different color combinations. You'd have maybe 5 or 6, and I just thought, well, that's really cool to just see how an image changes with being interpreted in different colors. And even after we did those first 2 letterpress editions and licensed the record to Rough Trade, and then had to have the covers printed by offset lithography. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I went out to Modern Album in Burbank where they were printing these, and that was the color combination that we chose, but I wanted to mess around with it. And I said, well, can you put silver ink in instead of gold, instead of the black ink? And so they ran a bunch of those, and I was standing there next to the press. I'm like, well, let's tweak it a little bit. So there's actually on the first offset edition, there's a wide range of variations there as well.
Oh, that's cool.
Because they just let me go out there and say, tweak this color.
Different times. You can't get away with it.
No, not very many places would let you do that now.
No, not at all.
All right, before I let you guys go, one last question. Looking back now, almost 40 years later, almost 4 decades later, what are your guys' thoughts individually looking back on Telephone-Free Landslide Victory and everything that you guys have done? What do you guys think about this particular record? Jonathan, what do you think?
God, it's hard to say it concisely, I guess. It's an amazing record. It's unique, and we managed to come up with something that was unlike anything else that other people were doing at the time. And I think that the fact that it still sounds that way is sort of a testament to it.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was a great moment, right? And it was, like to piggyback on what Jonathan's saying, it really it stood out from other things that were going on at the time. And yeah, I mean, I think about this with a lot of records, but I think it's really true. Like it would be hard to kind of get away with the sort of things that we did, later on. And I think people still respond to it. People very occasionally, I come in contact with someone much younger who recognizes it, and that's if they're familiar with Telephone, that's often their favorite record. And so it's it was great fun to make, and it was a very unique time.
Absolutely. Victor, what are your thoughts?
It always blows me away that it's so kind of, I don't know what the vision is precisely, but it's so fully formed, right? It's its own kind of unique little universe. And, it reminds me of things like the Modern Lovers' first record in a weird way. It's just kind of, it had just enough gestation time to become something really cool and kind of definitive in a weird way. I mean, I kind of feel like it's like you know, you look back, it's kind of like you're a space alien or something, right? You know, did I really do that? You know, was I really a part of it? It's strange, interesting kind of distance from it. But, you know, as with a lot of things like that, you know, like when I work with this bass student and have played him this stuff, you know, a lot of memories come floating back. And, you know, if we were going to do this podcast, I thought about it. It's just, I don't know. I just feel very fortunate. I think we were very lucky to have that experience.
Nice. Finally,
So,
David, you're done?
So I'll tell you a quick story about what somebody else said about it, just because it's funnier than shit. But there was a guy in a band in Santa Cruz. They were much more serious, much more sort of, you know, wanted to get signed by a major label, or, you know, kind of power pop, early alternative. I don't know exactly what they were. And on our first tour, we played in Boston. They had moved to Boston, and we played in Boston. And I saw him after the show, and he goes, "You guys are the most Santa Cruz band I have ever heard." And I said, "Oh, well, thank you." He goes, "No, I don't mean that in a good way. It's terrible."
Wow.
And I always thought this guy was an asshole, and I was like, "Oh, this is so great. We pissed off somebody that I really don't like, you know, by just simply making like an eclectic sort of album, right?"
By
And it
being
just like
who we are.
it broke his brain, right? So it broke a lot of people's brains.
So I don't know if you're going to remember this, David, and I can't remember if it was Telephone Free, but I think it was reviewed in Spin. And the jibe was, the kicker line at the end of it was, "Don't these guys understand that culture doesn't come from the suburbs?" Which is kind of a like an inherently false statement. Like culture, art comes from wherever human beings are, as we all know. But
Well, I'd
that
actually
really
argue
stuck
art.
in me bad. Like that really pissed me off for years. Still does, really. But that's always kind of what I always felt like we were, just by rote, we contradicted that statement that art does come from those suburbs, and sometimes it's pretty good.
Absolutely.
I don't know, you know, honestly, I'm not sure if that was Spin, because I felt like Spin's review of us was immediately good. But
Maybe it was Rolling Stone. I can't remember where it was, but I just remember that line specifically, and I also remember like, because on the spread it was also like Sonic Youth and something else, and it's like, oh god, you know, they don't understand.
Oh well, yeah. If you're from the East Coast, you're postmodern, deconstructing things. If you're from the West Coast, you're wacky. So we always got wacky thrown in, right?
Exactly.
Who cares? But like I said, we were like sort of like, who cares? And you know, I know that some people, it's almost like we didn't have this word then, but it's almost like we trolled a lot of people in the music business. We didn't understand we were doing it, but we trolled a lot of people in the music business and writers and other bands, and so everybody talked about us. It was like amazing. It was an amazing plan. It's what we weren't trying to do that. It wasn't really a plan, but it sort of had this strange effect that way.
Well, I wanted to thank you guys. All of you guys have a huge impact on me personally, both individually and collectively. So I really appreciate you guys taking time to talk about this wonderful album with us. It fell next in the series, Bruce, right? So we're up to 16 now.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate you guys taking the time. Thank you for making this album in the first place, and all the preceding albums as well, and for taking time to talk about it with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for persisting, because it was quite a email to get us organized.
It took us a while. Yeah, 4 time zones here, so we pulled it off.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, you guys.
Hey, really great to see you guys. Good, Jonathan, Victor, Bruce, Chris, like fantastic. Okay, see you guys later.
See you all. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Take care.
All right, talk later.
Hey guys.